I have had a chance to go around and talk to a lot of people, and there are a good many of you that I know and who know me, and I guess I'm a little surprised that as many of you who know me and have heard me speak about one thing or another for so many times have decided to come out and do it once again. I want to thank Frank Gilliam for his introducing this affair, providing the general introduction, and for the role he's played in keeping this lectureship alive. And I want to thank Ed Edelman for his introduction and for our long friendship. Ed reminded me earlier that he was an undergraduate when I and Mark Ferber, and Mark's sister is here, were graduate students here at UCLA, and then went off to Washington, D.C. as congressional fellows and brought back a couple of our buddies, Bill Gerberding and Howie Swearer, who went on to distinguish themselves not only here but at various other institutions, including the University of Washington and Brown. And it is a great privilege to be asked to give this lecture. It's a great privilege because of the people who have given lectures before, but especially because of the trio for whom it is named. Jack Bollens was a faculty member when I was a graduate student here, and then a colleague after I came back. I took a class from Jack. Chuck Reese was a very good friend. When I was finishing up my graduate work and moving on, Chuck came back to UCLA, and we knew each other very well. And it's great to be involved with a lectureship that honors those people. And I have come to know Marvin, who is still alive, and I'm trying to emulate Marvin. Now, I'm trying to emulate Marvin not just with the beard, but with the longevity. I think that's a good thing to try to emulate, and with his good humor and his good works and his wonderful contributions to this university. I have, as I said, had relationships with all these people and with so many of you over the years, and I am very pleased to be able to be here this evening. Now, there's something kind of ironic. The people that were honored were mainstays in political science and in public administration. Indeed, there was an MPA degree. And I have to admit to you publicly that I'm partially responsible, indeed perhaps substantially responsible, for the termination of that degree, because there was a time when the university, at least we felt, was in about as bad shape as it is now. Now, it wasn't. We learned that things aren't quite as bad sometimes as they're going to get in the future, but I'm talking with colleagues in the political science department, said, look, maybe you ought to quit devoting time to that degree and put the resources into the more general program of the department. Now, that didn't mean we did away with public administration. It meant that we did away with the MPA degree. And I think in retrospect that was probably a good thing, even though I have been criticized for it from time to time, but I am criticized for a lot of things, some of which I did and some of which I didn't do. But it's also interesting to note that the School of Public Affairs and the Department of Public Policy is, in a way, I think, picking up the substance of what that MPA degree did and training people for the public service in a way that occurred at that point in time. So I'm very pleased about that. I'm very pleased that my dean is here. I'm a professor emeritus of public policy, and I'm a professor emeritus of political science, and my chairman, Ed Kellerman, is here, and I'm pleased to have them both here. Now, I'm going to talk about something which you probably, many of you assumed I might. I wrote an article that appeared in the January issue of Policy Options for University of, the article was called Policy Options for University of California Budgeting, and it appeared in 2011 California Policy Options, which was published by the Lewis Center of the UCLA School of Public Affairs and edited by Dan Mitchell, who I see is here, and who is indefatigable in what he does for this university in a variety of ways as both a scholar and as an activist, and helps keep a lot of people on their toes. So I'm going to be speaking about a lot of things that appeared in that article. To some extent, it may be repetitious, and to the extent that that is so, and you have already read that article, I'm sorry for that. But this is something that is very much on my mind, and is something that ought to be on my mind and ought to be on your minds, given what's happening in the state of California today. Now, the state of California has had a very, very great history. And we don't need to go back to the years prior to World War I to World War II to any great extent, except to realize that California was growing and prospering and growing very much in a number of areas, but certainly especially in what was developing in Hollywood and in agriculture and in a burgeoning, developing airframe industry. But World War II brought about dramatic change across the world, across the various countries of the world, certainly across the United States, but more especially in California. What brought that about? Well, a lot of things. For a variety of reasons, a huge number of people from around the United States came to California as a part of their military service, and they, not unreasonably, found this to be a wonderful place. And when they went home and saw how things were back home, decided maybe it would be good to come back to California. So that was something which had a great deal to do with the growth and development of California in the post-World War II era. Now, one of the great benefits that came from World War II for California was the fact that taxes were being collected during that period, but there wasn't an awful lot to spend them on, and a rainy day fund developed that Earl Warren husbanded. So California came out of that period with this rainy day fund, which made it possible for it to do some things which needed doing. Another great thing that happened is that the University of California, which at that point in time one would think of primarily as Berkeley, but Berkeley and UCLA and San Francisco at that point in time, had begun to be recognized as great movers in what was happening in the world in terms of scholarship and in terms of technical pursuits. And there was a recognition that the University of California had and would be a very important factor in the development of California in the direction that wanted to go. And there was a remarkable era for California between 1945, 6, 7, and let's say when, 2000, 2001, 2002. I'll make some further divisions with regard to that as we move along. But it was the envy of the world. It grew to be the 6th, 7th, 8th nation in the world, in effect, in terms of GDP. Now, I've seen recently somebody said, well, yes, that's true, but you have to think that a lot of that was a result of the fact that it's of its size and its comparison with other states and its comparison with other nations. But you can't begin to put that all onto the size and the population of California. Things were happening which made it possible to move along in a variety of areas which are absolutely critical to this country and to the world today. And the University of California played a major role in that growth and development. Anyone who goes back and looks at the history of that period of time will realize that that's the case. It not only did so, It was recognized by all of those in public life that that was the case, and that it needed to be supported for a variety of reasons. It needed to be supported because it educated the youth of the state and the nation. It educated not only the undergraduates, but the graduate students and the professional students who were going to go out and help continue moving California and the United States and the world, in a way, forward in the right direction. And through a good part of that time, certainly from about 1945, 6, 7, through the early 1980s, maybe even later into the 1980s, close to 1990, although there were ups and downs in terms of the relative support of the state of California for the University of California and for the state college and university system, the direction of the curve or the slope of the curve was certainly upward. And it was a good relationship. It was a good symbiotic relationship between the state and the university. Now, when did this begin to change? You get into examinations of details, which it is hard to parse out. But clearly, at least as I look back on it, and I was heavily involved during all of this period, most of that period as chancellor, by the early 90s, things had begun to change. They had begun to change earlier, but it was not clear at the time that the change was underway. Ronald Reagan, in one of his first meetings with the Board of Regents as a regent and as the president of the Board of Regents, proposed a substantial increase in what was then called the registration fee, which is now rightly called what it is, tuition. And that was a substantial change in the way the University of California was treated by the state. I happened to be at the meeting, and President then Governor Reagan said that the University of California ought to be a good university for people who can't get into Stanford. Those, I think, were almost his exact words. Now, that never became policy. That never became open policy. But some of that began to creep in back at that point in time. And as I look back at the time on my career and upon what was happening, I said many times that there had been always a kind of a curve up and down with regard to the university in comparison to the private University of California and public universities generally, but especially the University of California, with regard to the private universities. So we used to, the presidents and chancellors used to get together, and the public, for a couple of years, the public presidents or chancellors would say, well, I'm glad I'm a chancellor or a president of a public university because things are much better. 2 or 3 years later, the private presidents and chancellors were saying that with regard to their situation. So this went up and down, but I think by the late 80s, it became clear that we were no longer going up and down, that they were parting, that the private universities were growing and prospering and the public universities were on a downward curve. And I think looking back, it is fairly easy to see that that is the case. I'll go on to talk a bit about what I think some of the reasons for that are and what we might do to change that situation, but I believe that is clearly demonstrable. There was in the late 90s and early 2000s a pause and what looked as if it might be a change for the better. The state became flushed with money again, and the state was in a position to provide more resources to the University of California and to do a variety of other things because it appeared that given the tax collections and other general fund income to the state, that it was going to be possible to do a lot of things which needed doing and had not been able to be done until then. Now that was really not the case, but it appeared to be the case. And one of the problems is that a lot of things were done, which were not just done for 1 year, but done on a continuing basis, and the funds were not there to support them. Now, the state of California is, I think we'd all say, in jeopardy. It is not a good state of affairs. We've seen what's happened with regard to the political system and the inability of the two parties to come together on anything. Now, that's not just a California phenomenon. It's a national phenomenon as well. But, and it is the case for some of the same reasons. One of the major ones being the redistricting process, which has gotten us to a point in which there are nothing but safe districts, for the most part. And the people who are elected in those districts don't have to pay attention to anyone except the people from their own party and the people who believe as they do. And that's something that we hope may be in the process of changing. So I'm going to say maybe that's going to be resolved. We'll have to see how the commission works, whether the recommendations of the commission are adopted, and what the impact of the changes which are made will have. But that is one of the things which has created a problem. Another major problem, if you look at the situation with regard to the university, and let me spend a bit of time talking about the university and its state of affairs at the present time, and it is something that we all need to take a very good look at. That's clear. I don't want to go into a great deal of detail about where what the problems in the University of California are at the moment. You all see them. You all know them for the most part. But just let me give you a few examples. I saw a quote the other day from Chancellor Bourgeois at UC Berkeley, who said that when he came to be the chancellor of that great institution, the state of California was the primary funder, providing $450 million. Next came federal funding at $350 million, student fees at $150 million, and philanthropy at about $200 million. Now, however, he says, federal funding comes first, $500 million, making UC, he says, a federal university. I take a little exception with that, but he said that. Rather a federal university rather than a state university, state-supported university. Next comes student fees at $315 million, and philanthropy at $315 million, and then the state of California. Now, that's a dramatic change. Now, let's say a bit about UCLA in that same regard. At the present time, UCLA has a total revenue of just under $5 billion. State funds account for $519 million of that. Student tuition, leaving out university extension, accounts for $535 million. The federal government's $675 million. And the state of California general fund appropriation is $375 million. Now that's a dramatic change. Now let's look at it from another point of view. In 1991, student fees were $2.6 billion for the university as a whole. $16 million came from the state, and the rest came from a variety of sources. At the present time, rather than $2.7 billion, the students now provide $7.3 $3 billion. And the state, rather than $16 billion, provides $8 billion. Now, that again, I think, is an indication of substantial change. Another way of looking at this is the decline in the spending per student. The spending per student for the core educational program was in 1990-91, when I see things beginning to change fairly substantially, the total was about $20 billion. Of that, $2.6 billion came from students, $16 billion from the state. Where at the present time, those figures are $8 billion from students and $7 billion from the state, and the funding per student is now only $16 billion. So that's a dramatic decline. I don't think I need to spend much more time on that. It's very clear that the state of the state is very bad, and the state of the university is very bad. And it's true that the relationship between the state and the university has fallen on very, very bad times. Now, what has brought this about? Now, most people will say, well, it's the Great Recession. And the Great Recession has played a role in that, no question about it. All states are suffering to some extent. I think California is suffering more. But I think for the most part, many of the other states will be able to pull themselves out of the situation they're in with relative ease and in a relatively short period of time. I do not believe that's the case with California. Now, why not? Well, there are several things I think that are causing that difficulty. One I've already mentioned, and I hope may be in the process of being resolved, and that's the districting process, which creates a situation in which, instead of the parties being, when Ed and I were being active, overlapping something like this, they are coming. They're in a situation like this, and that I hope will get some improvement, but I can't be absolutely certain about that, as you can not either. A second reason for this. And this is a political reason, as is apportionment, is the fact that a theory by a professor then at USC named Arthur Laffer became the order of the day. The notion somehow that the way to improve governmental revenues is to reduce taxes. That was implemented under Reagan because he was a very great advocate of Arthur Laffer's, and it didn't work then. That is, of course, as those of you who follow these things know, when the great deficit that we're now facing began to get where it is. And it has gotten worse over all of that period of time, with some variations, some upward swings as a result of other kinds of inputs. A second is are a couple of initiatives. And I'm going to step on people's toes on this, I'm afraid. One is Proposition 13. Now, Proposition 13 is one of the most complicated issues that ever was passed by the people of the state of California, and they've passed some whoppers. Proposition 13, if I ask all of you, what did Proposition 13 do, you'll tell me it reduced property taxes and put a collar around the growth of property taxes in the future. Yes, it did that, but it did a lot of other things. And its impact went far beyond that. To look at one of the things it did, it created a requirement that the budget needed to be passed, the state budget, by a 2/3 majority of both houses of the legislature. But not only the budget, any activity or any action by the legislature and the governor which would increase taxes. It created rule by minority. And I'm going to say a bit more about the initiative later, so I won't go on about that. But another thing that it did, which is a secondary effect of what it was meant to do, is that it took away the funds which had in the past provided for local government and local districts, and would have made it impossible for them to continue to operate. But what happened? The state of California, for one of the few times in its history for the last 30 or 40 years, had a substantial surplus. So the people who ran the state said, oh, well, we've got some money. We'll pick up the responsibilities that have hitherto been a requirement for local government. The main one being K through 12. So rather than being funded by the property taxes primarily in the area of in the districts in which K through 12 is provided, the state picked up that funding. It picked up a lot of other things. So and for a period of time, it was not clear that that was going to create the difficulties it did. But what it did was reduce the amount of money that was available to spend on other activities of the state, on the state's prior responsibilities, on what is in most states in this country the main responsibility of the state. So the Proposition 13 created difficulties of the kinds that I've indicated. It also created another long-term problem, and I'm going to again begin opting for something which is somewhat on the controversial side. It changed in a way what the initiative did in the state of California. Now, the initiative was adopted 100 years ago under the governorship of Hiram Johnson. And it was intended, I believe, as I read what was said about it at the time and what one would expect it to do, it was intended to provide an outlet for the people to take action when the governmental process, the normal governmental process, refused to do so. And throughout most of its history, that's what the initiative did. Now, it didn't. It began to change as people recognized they could get a lot done through the initiative process. But it is really with Proposition 13, at least as I read it, and I've read it fairly carefully, I may be wrong, what Proposition 13 brought about a substantial change in the way people looked at the initiative process. They said, wait a minute, if Jarvis can do that, then we can do things which will be in our benefit. And essentially they can, as long as they've got enough money to do it. That's what gets initiatives passed in this state. It is money. And I'm not saying that there aren't some very good initiatives that are passed, but that's another outgrowth of what occurred with Proposition 13. Now, another proposition that came along about 20 years later is Proposition 98. Proposition 98 said that the K through 12, the public school system, had to have about 42% of all the general funds that the state of California had to appropriate in any given year. But it said more than that, which is enough. It said that when, for a variety of reasons, it is not possible for the state to meet that obligation, it incurs a debt. And that debt has to be paid off in the future. So the 42% grows and grows and grows with every failure to meet the obligation that was set forth by Proposition 98. So those are very, very important matters. Now, a last item, which is and again, one could add many more, but for these reasons, for our purposes tonight, one more I want to spend a bit of time on is the tax structure in California. For a variety of reasons, one of which again goes back to Prop 13, because the property tax was reduced so substantially that it can make no real contribution. The two sources that the state has in funding the responsibility that it now carries, which is not only the traditional responsibility of the state, but what it has picked up from local government, is the income tax. Now, the income tax is a very inelastic, a very variable tax. When times are good, taxes go, the proceeds go up dramatically. When times are bad, they go down dramatically. One of the reasons why the false blessings came along in the late 90s, 2000, 2001, is because times were good in areas which produced substantial revenues from the income tax. And when the times changed for the worse, things were left standing dry. So these are things which need to be changed. Now, what about the future? What do we do? My concern, and I've said this for quite some time, and one of the things I propose is something that I argued 4 years ago. I believe that it is, but now I have greater reason for doing so. The greater reason being that I do not foresee a substantial enhancement of the problem of the state of California with the passing of the Great Recession. The structural problems which have brought it to the state it is at the present time are still going to be there. And I think therefore for chancellors and presidents and students and others to say we're going to go to Sacramento and make them give us more is really not much of an answer. There's not going to be much to give. There are really only two major areas in which the state has much flexibility. One is the prisons, and the other is higher education. The rest of the things are pretty well fixed. So they're, in my opinion, going to be the last to be dealt with, and I think it is going to be very difficult for the state to recover the size of the general, recover in the general fund area sufficient to meet the other needs and the needs of the University of California, given the problems that it confronts. So I propose that we move toward what I've called a modified privatization. Now, I've said this, and then as I think about it, what I say is, I predict we are going to move to a situation of privatization. Indeed, we will, because we already have. If the situation that I outlined earlier with regard to the relative funding of the university's budget by students, by the state, the federal government, and private sources isn't an indication of privatization or a substantial movement in that direction, then I don't know what is. Now, so I think that's going to happen. I think it's going to move much more in that direction in the next few years. And what I'm saying is let's take the bull by the horns and make it mean something good. So let's put together a system in which we work things out with the state so that we are not funded by an appropriation from the state, but given a subvention from the state that is based upon a contractual relationship, that representatives of the university and representatives of the state meet and decide, the state, you want us to do X, Y, and Z. educate this many students from the state of California in these areas at this level, and we will do that in exchange for that amount of money. And hopefully, that could be worked out in such a way that you could have a rolling 5-year contract. And the rolling 5-year contract would provide you with some degree of stability. And you'd come back every year and say, well, we think we did what we were asked to do. Did we? Yes, no, partially. Based upon that discussion, there's a continuation of the contractual relationship. I think that would be extremely valuable, but I think there are other aspects which would be very, very beneficial to the university. One is that you would be able, I think, through this process, to do the negotiations in such a way that money was money, that money is green, that money is fungible, that you get $500 million, but you can spend that $500 million in the way you believe is best determined to meet the obligations that you have agreed to in the negotiations. One year it may be increasing faculty salaries. The next year it may be building a building, so that things can be run much more in the private mode. You're not only being funded like a private institution, you're able to operate pretty much as if you were a private institution. I think there are a number of benefits of that kind that would be possible. I think also, under a situation like that, it would be possible to agree to funding, which in the aggregate would be substantially less than would be required to put us back in a status quo ante kind of situation. I've done some reasonable estimates, I think, that if one were to create a tiered system, and if Berkeley, UCLA, San Francisco were dealt with at one level, the several other universities, San Diego, Irvine, Santa Barbara, let's say, Davis at another, and Riverside and Santa Cruz and a third level, and Little Merced kind of protected for a while, that one could manage for substantially less money than otherwise would be required of the state. Now that means that the university is going to have to do a number of things. It's going to have to raise more from tuition. Well, it's already raising substantially more from tuition, and it's going to have to raise more from tuition, I think, before we enter into the next fiscal year, or at least before we get to the point where we know whether Governor Brown's proposal to continue some current taxation is going to be approved or not. There have been some moves made to substantially enlarge the number of out-of-state students, the number of international students, to enlarge them not at the expense of in-state students, but by adding more students. Now, you may not know this, but you should know it. The undergraduate and graduate resident students will be paying next year about $12,000. Out-of-state students pay $34,000. Now, if the average cost of education is around $20,000, we're making some money on out-of-state students. And that money can be put back into what is required for the residents of California that we are trying to educate as well. So that needs to be done. We need to do a better job of obtaining indirect cost recovery from the federal government, and it's clear that we can. We need to raise more money through the research that is conducted here, and which receives income through patents and royalties and so forth on patents. We need to increase the funds that are derived from the private sector, great as it is now. and get more of that coming to us in a way which allows us to put it into unrestricted kinds of activities. So there are a lot of things that need to be done. They're being done. They're being done to meet the situation which exists, which is a move toward privatization. But let's do it in a way in which we get credit for that, and we get to do things differently than we would have if that had not occurred. I think this is a reasonable proposal. It's not anything that's going to be easy to accomplish. It's like the old saying about how do we deal with, in World War I, how do we deal with the German submarines? We boil the water. And someone said, how are we going to do that? And he said, that's your problem. That was I had the idea. You know how to implement it. It's not going to be easy. There are a lot of reasons why it won't be easy. I want to talk about, and they have to do with the state being unwilling to give up control. They have to do with the conservative nature of the educational process and unwillingness to look at something as substantially something that is as substantial a departure as what from the current situation as what I'm proposing. And there are some concerns that are going to have to be overcome. One is the concern that increased tuition will reduce the ability of students to come to the university. I've looked at this very carefully. I looked at it all the time I was, all during the latter 15 or 20 years that I was chancellor. I've looked at it around the country. I looked at it in Florida. And I think every bit of evidence that one can come up with is that the best way to provide access to needy students is a medium to high tuition and a high financial aid program. The University of California, I think, provides at the present time probably the best financial aid to the students that are coming in of any university in the country. And we see that in terms of the number of students that are in the university today from underprivileged areas, from underrepresented areas, the numbers of students that are receiving Pell Grants, almost anything you look at, are doing very well. I have asked people in the financial aid office here and elsewhere, what is the evidence that increased tuition has changed in any substantial way the attendance of the makeup of our student body, or made our student body less representative, or decreased in any way accessibility? And they say that we can't find any. Now, that is not to say that there aren't incidents. There clearly are incidents. But any substantial effect in that regard, I think, is not there. So I think for a variety of reasons, this is something that ought to be given serious consideration. I urge people to do so. Now, in closing, I want to make it clear that while I've talked about the University of California, and I think the University of California is the only institution, only one of the institutions in higher education that could move in that area for a variety of reasons, that what we do would have an impact on the state college and university system, which cannot move in that direction. It does not have the ability to make those kinds of moves. I also want to point out that that the problems that are facing higher education are not unique. I was looking the other day at a paper done by a research institute here at UCLA, and it may surprise you, as it did me, that in several ways of looking at the funding of K through 12, California ranks 5-0. Every state in the country, every other state in the country provides more funding per student in its public educational system than the state of California. So I think to go out and say, oh, just give us some of the money that's going to public education isn't a sensible thing. I think the problems in public education are worse than the problems in higher education. So I don't want to take that away from them. I've probably talked longer than I should, and I've talked about a subject which I have written about and many of you have heard me talk about before. I hope I've done it in a somewhat different way and one that has had some kind of an impact on you. And I think now we have an opportunity for questions from the audience or comments from the audience. Yes, I see a former regent there.
Chuck, you propose a rolling 5-year contract. Didn't the regents already try the compact with the governor, and didn't it not work?
Well,
what would be different about what
I'm talking about a contract. I'm not talking about a compact. I think the compacts with the governor were a bad thing when they were entered into. I said so in the last talk I made to the regents as I was leaving the university. What they did, if you look at what's happened, for instance, in tuition, they forced tuition down, kept it low when it could have been rising at a reasonable rate every year. And for 6 or 7 years, there's no increase in tuition, and then all of a sudden you make a 25 or 30% jump. Now the 25 or 30% jump is much worse for the students than a 5% increase per year, and you don't raise nearly as much money that way because you have foregone what you would have gotten during those increases. Yes, I think it's different. And it may not be possible. I think, and there are those who will say that the legislature is not in a position to commit its successors, and therefore a contract of that kind is not available. The legislature enters in all kinds of contracts. Why is this one different? Yes. Yes. You, yes. Deanie.
We're about to get into a phase where we're going to celebrate the centennial of UCLA, which is a wonderful thing. And if we look ahead to 2018 or 2019, it's very possible that tuition could be as high as $25,000.
Well, the governor says it may be 20,000 this year. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I don't think so, but it could. It could be 30,000. My question is, we depend upon Pell Grants and Pell Grants, as well as return to aid and scholarships. How do you see Pell Grants and Pell Grants varying in the next decade?
I think one should go to the legislature and the governor and press very hard to keep Cal Grants funded at the level per student that they were in the past, and I think the same thing should be true of Pell Grants. And I think the proposed or the notions about what the federal budget ought to be that I've heard from the president, who's speaking down in Culver City somewhere at the moment, would do that and point that out as a very real necessity on the part of the federal government. Did that answer your question?
Do you see Cal Grants in greater jeopardy now?
Do I see Cal Grants as a greater necessity? I think anything you name it, and it's in greater jeopardy. Yes, but I think one ought to press very hard for continuation of strong funding for Cal Grants. Yes, Ed?
Yes, I agree with you completely on Prop 13. It deprived local government, shifted the ballgame to Sacramento, and we've never recovered completely from that. And I wanted to ask you a question about your involvement in trying to challenge Prop 13 with Judge Norris.
Judge Bill Norris, who was a former Justice of the Ninth Circuit, and with the good office of his law firm, brought suit against the appropriate official in the state to have that portion of Prop 13 that requires the 2/3 vote declared unconstitutional on the grounds that it was not an amendment to the Constitution but was a dramatic revision of the Constitution because it took away the authority of the governor and the legislature to run the affairs of the state and gave it to the people. That is still winding its way through the courts, and who knows. We are now in the process of filing a suit to declare the initiative unconstitutional after 100 years. Again, on the same grounds, that it was put in effect as a constitutional amendment when in fact it was a substantial revision of the governmental process created by the Constitution of California, and also that it may be a violation of the federal Constitution in that the federal Constitution requires a Republican form of government in each of the states, and that the initiative as it has operated in California has made it cease to be in some respect a Republican form of government.
If you need another plaintiff,
Oh, good for you, Ed. Yes.
What do you think the prospects of success of going to a split tax roll to get the commercial property out from under, Prop 13, and what sort of revenue projections would you see?
I think there are a number of improvements which could be made in Proposition 13 rather than doing away with it. But I don't think they're possible. I don't think you can go through the initiative. One of the great difficulties of the initiative process in California is that anything that is done by initiative has to be undone by initiative, and which means that you have to go back to the people and get them to undo Prop 13. And I think they'll do the same. They'd have the same reaction they did when it came about earlier. Oh, that's undoing the property tax benefits which we receive from Prop 13. So I think, if it were possible to make changes in Prop 13, Prop 98, and in the initiative process by a political means, rather than throwing the baby out with the bath, I'd be for that. But I don't believe you can do it without the baby going out as well. Yes, another distinguished public servant.
Chancellor, you mentioned on the constitutional side and the reapportionment commission, which may affect the partisan divide. You use that hand gesture like this, go like that. Good hand gesture. There is another factor, and I pray you watch this the way we all do before we give up on the
Term limits.
Well,
Well, there may be others. Term limits is one I meant to mention and didn't.
the days of the closed primary are over. Repeat, the days of the closed primary are over. And so what you'll have, let me take the Republican situation, same as with the Democratic. We're about to enter into this. It's now affecting the congressional delegation, but more importantly, it affects the state assembly and state senate. And that is the way it'll work in the primary, let's say it's in June. There will be a list of candidates. They'll have party label next to their name. So John Jones, Republican, Sam Doe, Democrat, Bill Jones, blank, and so on. It's very similar to something happened up in the state of happening in the state of Washington. The primary voter, which will include defined state voters, any party, Republican, Democrat. You might have, say, 3 Republican candidates in a Republican area after the apportion. They will no longer be competing just inside the Republican Party constituency. But within the primary, everyone else can vote too. Democrats can vote, about 30% of the state now is defined state. Those folks can vote and so on. And the same is true for the Democratic Party. And it remains to be seen what the impact will be. But a lot of folks supported this and supported it twice, actually. Once when it was established, and then recently when there was an effort made in the referendum process to repeal it. And so we now go into a situation where this is that mild-and-hour proposal. Remember, he extracted it, the moderate Republican who voted for the budget. He extracted the deal from Karen Bass, get this on the ballot, but moderate Republican, and he regrew the back counter and so on. But he put it in so someone like him or someone like Governor Schwarzenegger, or someone like that would have a chance to win Republican.
But unless the unless something is done to lessen the impact of safe districts, the guy or gal with Republican by his name is going to be chosen in a safe Republican district, and the guy or gal with Democrat by his or her name is going to be elected in the safe Democratic district.
And congruent with this, contemporary going on right now, is a nonsense. Instead of it being done by the legislature, signature of the governor, it's now being done by that commission, which has been appointed essentially by the state auditor. Well, remember, all these names applied and people applied. And by definition, the people on this commission cannot have been active in party affairs. They could not have contributed over $100.
Well, we'll see how that comes out. I hope it comes out well because it's extremely important. Yeah.
I've heard speaking about this for the last 4 years, different ways. This is now a different environment politically. I pray we all keep an eye on it. It may have some impact because a certain type of Republican who might be willing to vote for revenue enhancements or to continue them may now have a chance to get through the Republican primary and be moderately perhaps also not.
Yes.
Thanks for a lot of the suggestions that you made in the presentation and the paper. But I took note that your focus was primarily, if not exclusively, on the funding side of the university. And this notion of self-sufficiency or adequate funding and changing revenue streams and so on. I'm wondering, given your involvement in the development of the master plan, what your thoughts are in the relationship or the impact of these ideas that focus almost exclusively on funding to the goals of the master plan and, in many ways, the relationship of that plan to the people of California. Have you given up the ghost on the goals of the master plan?
No, I haven't. There's only, look, the people, when they think of the master plan, tend to jump to conclude the major result of the master plan was a free education for California citizens. And that was hardly ever discussed. It was assumed that had been the case, that would continue to be the case. The real effort with regard to the master plan was the creation of differentiation of function that has allowed the University of California to pursue excellence in its sphere and the state college universities to pursue excellence in their sphere, and to continue to provide access to all Californians in one or another of those systems who are eligible and capable of achieving within that system's educational program. And I don't see anything that would change that. The only change is the change with regard to a free or, well, the assumption was there would be no tuition, that the fees would be fees to cover incidentals, and that's why it was called an incidental fee. That went by the way a long time ago. And what we need to do, I think, is do things which will preserve and protect the other goals and of the master plan. I think maybe my old buddy. Dave. But
you propose a radical change in the master plan that would force a recontractualization of it by proposing a tiered system within the University of California. How sanguine are you about the?
I think that's going to be would be a very difficult thing to bring about, and the. But I think if you're going to do this, I think you have to do that, because we all can't move pari passu in the direction that I'm talking about. Riverside couldn't do it. But do we all have to hold back and be butchered because Riverside can't do it? Or Santa Barbara can't do it? I think the answer is no. I ran into the same arguments when I proposed the differential professional fee. The other chancellors opposed it. I finally got enough supporting it to get it on the books. And now we have differential professional fees. the School of Public Affairs, there are the Anderson School, the law school, a variety are doing that. Within the university, we've just finally agreed that we can deal with this issue differentially. I think we have to agree within the campus. I think we have to agree that we can deal with it differentially campus from one group of campuses to another. I think that 10 years from now, if there are 3 in Tier 1 to begin with, there'll be 4 or 5. And maybe we'll all be back where we started. But of course I have another notion that the University of California is a nice concept, but it really ain't a university. It's a collection of 10 universities, 6 of whom are in the Association of American Universities, which is reserved only for the most elite universities in the United States. Yes?
I'm Bill Hughes, the guy that wrote the original Clean Air Act. My first semester at UCLA, the total fees were $12. My last semester at graduate school, the fees were $36. At that time, the university, in other words, was essentially free. And it couldn't refuse anyone who was qualified to enter. As a result, of course, the university had to get real tough and grade awful hard and get rid of a bunch of students. But as a result, it ended up graduating some of the finest engineers, scientists, business people in the world. And you kind of wonder, was that the right way to go or not?
The University of California is still accepting every student who applies who meets the requirements. They do not get into the campus of their choice. There are many thousands of students who would like to come to UCLA, don't come to UCLA, but they can get into another campus of the university. I believe in the class that will be coming in November, Merced is the only campus that's taking overflow. Everybody else is closing up. Merced's taking all the overflow. So every student who is eligible to attend the University of California and applies is being admitted. Yes. I think that was the way to go, and I think it is the way to go, and I think we have to find some way to make that continue to be possible. Yes.
Firstly, I'm proud to say Dr. Bill Hughes, this guy who spoke just before me, is a good friend of mine. Secondly, I wanted to thank you for your very thoughtful and informative presentation. And basically going back to a portion of your talk about money being fungible. Being that K through 12 and the prison system are the 2 largest burdens on the budget, and given that we're $27 billion in debt at the present time, is there a way of an initiative or a petition to the federal government, because they have a huge responsibility in those 2 matters. 40% of the people who are incarcerated are undocumented, and about 40 or more of the students in the school system are undocumented. I would think the financial burden for incarcerating these people or educating these people should be, in large measure, a responsibility of the federal government. And some other things.
I don't disagree with that. I think if one could achieve that goal, it would be a good goal. It would be something to really work for. The problem is, unless we change our attitude about taxation, the federal government is going to be as incapable of providing funding for that as the state of California is. At some point in time, there has to be a recognition that what most people don't believe, that taxes per capita have gone down, and especially taxes per capita on the wealthy, not so wealthy, extremely wealthy, and that in that area, in those groups, there are a lot of people who pay no taxes at all. So something's got to be done. I mean, we cannot continue to go on saying never increase taxes, always cut taxes, or we'll cut government. Now, somebody said, maybe it was Ed, said tonight when I was talking about Reagan, that you know what Reagan's catchword was.
Revenue enhancement.
No, government is bad. Government is not the solution. Government is the problem. And if you continue to believe that, which at least the pundits on television and the members of the Republican members of Congress tend to believe that the American people believe that, and if the American people do believe that, then I think we have our hands tied. I don't believe that's the main concern of the American people, and I believe if given a real leadership, they will realize that something has to be done to enhance the revenues to some extent, to be able of government at all levels, to be able to do the things they want government to do. The problem is that people feel that government is bad, but this government is good. This representative is good. That representative is good. This needs to be done, and we need more money to do that, but we don't need to do all the other things. And at some point in time, we have to come together as a people and agree that what is in best interest of the public is in the best interest of the public. Thank you very much.
Well, you stole my speech. Okay. Well, thank you very much again, Chuck, for coming. We all appreciate you, and I think it was quite fitting that you were the speaker today because, you know, as I think about it, about your connection with our department, the political science department, and how you were the inspiration behind the creation of this School of Public Affairs, which you can see is alive and well and thriving. And you're a member of it now, but you know, it all began with you, and we really much appreciate it. I want to thank everybody who came out tonight again. This is always a great event because it brings out many people from the UCLA community and even outside the community, and of course alums, which you know, who we only see occasionally. But I'm sure many of you came here to support us all in this endeavor, this Bollens-Ries-Hoffenberg Lecture, and hopefully you can continue to come. This has been a great spring for the political science department and for the campus because, you know, about a month ago we had the most recent Nobel laureate in economic sciences, Eleanor Ostrom, an alum of our department, who we hosted in this very room. And then to have Chuck Young cap it off tonight was a great accomplishment. I want to thank, as I said, all of you here, but I want to especially thank the faculty in the department, you know, who turned out again very much. People who probably don't know you, but you ought to introduce yourself at this reception we're about to have, and also the students, and of course members of the School of Public Affairs as well, who turned out in addition to our distinguished shared colleague Frank Gilliam, the dean, and we really appreciate that. I also would like to thank the staff of the Political Science Department who were key to pulling this off, as they always have been in the past. Susan Pfeiffer, who is here, and Belinda Sunu, who you probably met, who's done a fine job. Jim Bondurant and Kathy Escobedo also were very helpful, in addition to some other folks. But again, thanks for coming. We have a reception which is going to commence as soon as you get out there. Somebody has the hand up. Let me, yeah?
Just have a very brief question. For those of us who came a little late, this name Luskin, could you give a brief answer to who that might be and significance of it?
Pardon? Okay, thanks very much.
I didn't see where the question. Thank you, Ed. Where the question came from? Sorry, where the question come from? Meyer and Renee Luskin are UCLA alums from the 1940s. I was interested to hear your comments about tuition. Meyer said that tuition was $29 when he came, and he got a $30 scholarship. And I've always quipped that he must have invested it quite well. The Luskins have contributed $100 million to UCLA, $50 million of which has gone to the School of Public Affairs. It is at least 90% in endowment in important categories like fellowships for students, our ability to retain and recruit the best faculty, and it's currently paid off. One of our departments told me of their top 16 recruits this year, 12 are coming. Last year, of their top 16 recruits, only 4 came. So students have been turning down Harvard and MIT to come, and a large part of the Luskins gift allows us to provide support for those students. And the Luskins have a very simple mission, and that's to make Los Angeles a better place, and they believe that the human capital here at the university is a critical way to achieve that. So this has just happened in the last couple of months, not surprisingly. We are terribly gratified and are trying to be responsible stewards of the gift. So you'll be hearing more from us and about the Luskins as we move forward. So, but tonight's about Bollens-Ries-Hoffenberg, and I just want to second Ed's remarks. A great talk, and I hope you all enjoy the reception.